CES started this week, and Nvidia's keynote brought their expected news about the next generation of graphics cards. But another less talked about aspect of their presentation really caught my eye. I genuinely think Nvidia are about to change gaming forever. This title wasn't hyperbole, especially for online PvP games like Warzone. The feature in question is called ACE or ACE, and in a freaky vision of the future, I actually had to ask ACE what ACE stood for. This got weird.
Welcome, ask away.
In Nvidia ACE, what does the ACE stand for?
Nvidia ACE stands for Avatar Cloud Engine, a suite of technologies that brings digital humans to life with facial animation and speech.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't know why I said thank you. It's like I'm talking to a toaster. It feels weird and I kind of hate myself for it, but it felt kind of right. So anyway, the Avatar Cloud Engine. So far, I imagine that's nothing you haven't seen already. An AI-generated video using a language model just answered my question using a knowledge bank it's been trained on. It's something that we've all got used to over the last couple of years. Things like ChatGPT. It's just kind of that, but also rendering a 3D picture of a person's face. And in fact, Nvidia's ACE was actually revealed back in 2023. It's been used for things like shop assistants and, information kiosks at airports, and even things like giving you advice about interior design choices or helping you to understand the instructions on some medicine and stuff like that. It's already something that companies have developed and kind of experimented with in the real world. But the new thing that was announced at CES was about how it's getting incorporated into games. And this is something special. I'm sure we've all had that experience of wanting to play an online PvP game with friends, but just not being able to find the right person. Most games that let you play in teams are more fun in a group, and of course part of this is playing with your friends and getting to hang out, but even playing with strangers is often favourable to playing online. I'm pretty convinced that the majority of solo players in games like Warzone actually queue up for quads, and this is kind of backed up by how they hardly ever add limited time modes with solo playlists. I'm guessing the vast majority of people play Warzone in quads, whether they've got a group of friends or not. And in Warzone, quads is kind of the easiest game mode because of it. In solo, you just get players who are confident playing by themselves. In duos and trios, you tend to get pre-made groups, people who are working together and communicating. And then in quads, you tend to get those kind of random mixes of people that aren't necessarily working together, they aren't necessarily that confident, and it means it's the easiest playlist. When you play with a group, even if they're strangers, you've got a chance that you'll get carried by someone who's better on the team. You get to react to what they're doing, and that kind of makes the game a bit more fun. You might learn something from people who might do something that you wouldn't normally do. And most importantly, you can blame all of your failures on them. But of course there are downsides too. It's not always possible to get friends online to play your favourite game. Especially as you get older, getting a group together is more and more difficult. It turns out some of my in real life friends don't prioritise games in their life quite as much as I do. And then when you do play together, some people might have connection issues because they're on Wi-Fi or something. Others might have dodgy mics because, they're not willing to spend hundreds of pounds to have the best audio setup because they're not content creators, and some might just not be that fun to play with because they don't know that game well enough, or they know it too well and constantly tell you what to do, or maybe they kind of rage out and ruin the atmosphere. I know for one, I'm a terrible teammate for my in real life friends. I always blame everybody else for things that are probably my fault and kind of refuse to take responsibility. I'm aware of that. I'm aware that I can be a bit of a pain to play with. But then even if you're playing with randoms, especially here in Europe, there's a decent chance they won't speak the same language, or maybe they're just not interested in talking and they won't have their mic on, or they'll have one of those annoying PlayStation 5 controllers where the mic is always on and all you can hear is them arguing with their family or eating or something. Or sometimes people just don't want to play in the same way that you do. Playing with other people is better than playing alone, but having a good time playing with other people can be incredibly difficult. And this is where Nvidia ACE is stepping in. In the presentation, they showed off some new co-op partners for games like PUBG and Naraka Blade Point, both Battle Royale games. Really good Battle Royale games. If you haven't played them, try both of them, they're awesome. And these co-op partners are entirely AI driven. Unlike regular bots, where, in games there'll often be bots, and PUBG's had bots for a long while, and so's Naraka Blade Point, and even Call of Duty has it in a boot camp mode, where the bots are just kind of programmed to follow some basic kind of logic, I guess, of, at the beginning I need to try and pick up these things to loot up, and then we're going to go into fight. If I see an enemy, shoot at them. Instead of that, these bots don't just know how to play the game, but you can also communicate with them using your microphone, and they can understand what you're saying. They can provide information that they've noticed, and they can react appropriately in game. The idea is that, say you fancy playing some PUBG, but you don't want to play solos. On your own system, you could choose to play duos with one of these AI partners that would be running on your PC, and without any kind of setup, you just hop in. It's like playing with a random player. But then when you're in the game, you can just talk to them naturally, like you would with a human. Things like, hey, I need some, I think they gave the example in the video of, hey, I need some armor and some ammo for 5.56 ammo. Can you try and find me some? And then the AI bot did go and find some and was like, hey, I'm pinging it here for you. And then moved on. It didn't make a big deal of it. It was just doing what a normal player would do. Or you could say, you're in a fight and they say, hey, can you flank these guys? And then the AI-driven player does go around and flank them, but then gets shot and gets downed and actually says, okay, now I'm going to have to crawl back to you to get rezzed. And they do this using generated voice lines, letting you know exactly what they're doing like a human would. And unlike a human, they don't have any kind of ego or wants or personality problems. They'll just go along with what you want to do and try to support you as best as they can. Now, obviously, this is lacking that kind of social thing. They're not a real person. You're not going to have, like, a good time hanging out with your buddy. You're not just going to be chatting about stuff. Or, I don't know, maybe they will let you just chat about stuff. But that's not going to be the same as playing with a person. But just in terms of the gameplay, you're going to have that feeling of playing with a squad or playing with a partner. And it's going to be someone that's always doing what they can to support you, but while also being able to behave kind of naturally, so they're not just like a stupid bot that's just following you around, and they don't have some of the problems that real people do, who, kind of want to go and be the main character. They want to go do their own thing. So this is all down to Nvidia's ACE, and that at its heart is a framework of different services. It's not just one thing. At the most basic level, it seeks to understand the game world and the situation it's in the way that a human does. So it looks at the context, it tries to work out like what bits of information are available to it, and I think they actually have to kind of, go and look at things or listen out for things. It can't just read that information from the game, and then it turns that into an understanding of what's happening, and then it makes decisions based on it. With the behavior obviously being able to be tweaked by a developer, like they could control how aggressive the bots are or how independent they are. And maybe that could even be tweaked on a player-by-player basis. Like, hey, we've noticed that you like playing with someone who's a bit more aggressive, or we noticed that you like playing with someone that goes and searches for a lot more loot and stuff like that. Then when the player speaks, it uses a small language model to turn your words into text, which it can then understand and factor into its decision making. So it should be able to understand things like flanking from that context. And it can also do things like letting you know when something's not possible. If you're on a cliff and you say, hey, flank round to the left, it could be like, there's not enough space there, I can't do that. A bit sort of 2001, I can't let you do that, how?
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
But I think that could be a big step up from kind of what's possible now. Now, the reason it's using a small language model, you might have heard about large language models in the past. This is a small language model, is because this actually needs to happen in real time. It needs to happen quickly, and it doesn't need to be able to like recite the complete works of Shakespeare to you in game. Although that would be kind of funny if you were like, hey, in this next fight, can you just shout out a soliloquy from Hamlet while we're fighting? That could be a lot of fun. But anyway, I don't think it's designed to do that. It's more going to be focused on trained just on things to do with the game. Now, after that, it uses a separate part of the framework to generate voice lines. This is a separate thing. So it will use that sort of text that it's created in response to what you've said, and it will generate new voice lines, trying to sound as natural as possible, letting you know what's going on. And like I said, it's trying to be as natural as possible. Obviously, AI voices aren't great yet. They're still in that kind of uncanny valley where they're not 100% convincing. I have heard some that are really, really good, but most of them sound very stilted and robotic. But, I mean, it's quite cool that they can do this, because not only are they doing this in English, they can do this in whatever language you want. Obviously, all of these language models can be kind of adapted or at least translated, so while they might not be perfect, this kind of thing can be used by a developer to have something that can communicate with the player in their own language, which is pretty amazing. And then after that, there's another part of the framework that creates animations and lip syncing based on what they're saying, based on the sounds of what they're saying, to try and make it so the character, looks more lifelike. Now, like I said, this isn't perfect. It doesn't sound very natural right now. There's a little bit of a delay whenever it's talking, and even the small language model actually uses up 1.5 gigabytes of VRAM on an Nvidia graphics card. That's pretty huge, and you actually need an Nvidia graphics card. You need an RTX graphics card for this to work. My 3080 that's in my PC right now only has 10 gigabytes of VRAM, using 1.5 gigabytes of that just to do the language model for this character. That's a pretty huge ask. I don't think my GPU wants to give up that much. But these are the first steps. This is kind of the beginning of this towards something that I think could be an utter revolution in PvP gaming. I've made a ton of videos before about how important I think bots are for the future of PvP games like Warzone. PvP bots, the ones where the game tries to trick you into thinking that they're people, but they're not, they're actually AI. They don't cheat, they're never toxic, they don't use exploits, they don't have connection issues, they can be forced not to use the most annoying meta, and most importantly, they don't care if they lose. It doesn't matter what sort of experience they're having. I've had this idea of a future of Warzone where when you load up, you choose the difficulty of your next match, say on a slider from 1 to 10. So if you choose level 1, you'd be mostly against bots, and there'd be a few other players that also picked 1 and a kind of your skill level. So then while you're playing that game, you could just relax or try something out and see how many kills you could get without needing to ruin the games of lesser skilled players. You wouldn't be up against people much worse than you. The lobby would be mostly filled with bots. So say if there's a new weapon coming out and you're like, okay, I want to try this out, but I don't want the stress of just getting killed straight away. You could do something like that. Or, you could go for crazy kill records and all things like that, just in a super easy lobby. And then if you put it up to level 5, so you put it somewhere in the middle, you'd be up against other players who are as similar to you as possible, which is, in theory, what skill-based matchmaking is meant to do right now. But the servers could backfill the games with bots at your level if it can't find enough real players. Lots of people get annoyed at Warzone right now because while skill-based matchmaking and the connection matchmaking tries to find people in your region who are searching at the same time as you for the same playlists and they're the same skill level as you, and it even goes so far as to look for people on the same input as you and stuff like that, obviously it struggles to do that sometimes. Depending on the region you're in, depending on the time of day you're playing, stuff like that, depending on your skill level, it struggles. So with this system, it could just fill up the game with bots. If you've been searching 30 seconds, it hasn't filled up a whole lobby, it'll just be, okay, we'll fill the rest up with bots that are about the same level as you are, and then you'll be able to have short matchmaking times. You won't be forced to play with people with dodgy connections or you having a bad connection to the server, and you'd still be able to have full matches where every fight is fair. Then for the pro players and the content creators, they'd be able to get bragging rights by setting the difficulty all the way to 10. Maybe they'd get special rewards or something for winning games at that level, where the best players get matched together and the servers are backfilled with bots that are absolutely lethal. They learn from past mistakes, they've got high accuracy, high reaction times. That's where you'd get the real challenge. Now the best players wouldn't need to go up against less skilled players just to fill up their lobbies, and they wouldn't be forced to log into long matchmaking times or games with poor connections or anything like that. They could easily constantly find matches. They wouldn't really have an excuse for not going into matches against people at their level. And then if they want to go fight against people who are worse than them because they want the content, they want those high kill counts and stuff like that, they can go up against bots so real people don't have to suffer because some content creator wants to capture some content. Obviously they could also leave ranked in as only humans, only playing against each other, and you'd accept the fact that you'd have longer matchmaking times and maybe worse connections because you're trying to play against real humans. I think this would be a win for absolutely everybody, and the only big downside I can see is that there'd be increased server costs for Activision from having less players on each server. You know, right now there's 120 players on each server. Maybe with this there'd only be 10 or 20 players on each server, so that would mean more servers needing to run, and the servers would have to work harder to do all the computation for the bot characters. I've got no idea how hard it is to run AI characters, but if this small language model is 1.5 gigabytes of VRAM, I feel like it would be pretty chunky to have loads of bots that are actually smart running on the servers. And there's also the issue that right now AI players aren't good enough to be convincing. You can make them hard to fight against, you know, you can give them unnatural accuracy and awareness, but making them lifelike and kind of interesting to fight against is a whole other issue. Right now the bots in Warzone's bootcamp aren't interesting. They just kind of run straight towards you and shoot. They're pretty terrible. And I think that's why, I'm sure if Activision announced, hey, Warzone's now going to have loads of bots in it and there's a difficulty slider and all that stuff I just said, you'd get the usual suspects on social media saying, oh, this is terrible, I don't want to play against bots, blah, 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 blah. And there'd be this big backlash against it and it wouldn't happen, even though it would be a win for absolutely everybody and solve everybody's problems with the game. People have this kind of prejudice against playing against bots. They've already decided that that's something they don't want to do. I genuinely think if the bots get better, if the bots get more lifelike, if they get to the point where you'd actually kind of struggle to tell that they're bots, then I think it would be super good, and I think that's where Nvidia's ACE could help. Now, the presentation on ACE didn't just focus on PvP games. They were shown creating lifelike characters in social sim games, you know, games that are coming out quite soon, where the characters could create their own storylines and like react in interesting lifelike ways to new situations that they hadn't seen before. They showed characters in this detective game that could be interrogated using real conversations, like you just talking into a microphone, and the characters even had separate internal monologues to what they were actually saying. Like, the game could show you, hey, this is what this character's thinking, but this is what they're saying, so you could kind of see the discrepancies in it. They even showed off this boss fight in a co-op PvE game, and the idea was that the boss was driven by Nvidia ACE, by AI, and could make smarter decisions on how to fight the players, learning from past experiences. So, you know, hey, this team's got a healer, and I know that last time when a team fought me with a healer, the healer made it so I couldn't kill anyone, so I'm going to go for the healer first and like jump over this shield and attack them from the back, just making the boss more interesting to fight against. They even showed off how the technology is being used right now in games that are sort of about to come out or have already come out. So I know people often worry about AI replacing voice actors, but they're actually showing how it can be used when someone has recorded voice acting lines. They can use it to create the animation, to create the lip syncing and the gestures and stuff like that, to try and make it more lifelike. Stuff like that's huge for smaller studios that can't afford motion capture facilities and all of that kind of stuff. If you've got someone who can just do a voice acting line and then all of the animation is created using generative AI, that's pretty amazing. And on that point, I know AI has a bad rep, particularly generative AI. I've talked about it in videos before about how I think there's probably a place for it and there's a reason some companies could use it, but it's definitely not great right now in 2025. Generated AI dialogue is terrible compared to even vaguely competent script writing. Generative AI voicing's awful compared to human voice actors, and even the animation is still way worse than what can be done by hand or with motion capture. But it is getting better, and it's getting better really, really quickly. The idea of even like small indie studios who can't afford teams of writers and actors and animators and motion capturing rigs and all that kind of stuff, being able to create more realistic NPCs that allow for more natural interactions in games could be absolutely huge. Like, I've been going on about how great Grand Theft Auto 5 is right now with the animation and the voice acting and the writing and stuff. That sort of stuff is out of the reach of most companies. I was talking in that video about how the reason we don't get many games like GTA 5 is there's not many studios in the world that can afford to create something like that. We could get more games, at not necessarily that quality, but approaching that quality with tools like this. You know, small studios, individual developers could create things that are way more realistic using these kind of tools. It's worth noting that the Nvidia ACE framework is shockingly open. This isn't like some incredibly expensive thing that no one can access. Loads of it is just available. Loads of it is something that anyone can use. And I think Nvidia do this partly because you can run a lot of it on their cloud network, and obviously you're paying for access to that. And the alternative, one of the things that they were talking about at CES 2025, was that they can actually run some of it locally now, so you can run it on your PC as long as you're running an RTX Nvidia card, you know, an Nvidia GPU, which would lead to this weird situation where there would be some video games that would only work if you had an Nvidia graphics card, which isn't something we've really got at the moment, and something that I'm sure Nvidia would be quite keen on. But also for the larger studios that can afford things like teams of writers and motion capture and all that sort of stuff, I get that there's a risk of some of them using this to cut corners and some of them using this to save money on voice actors and script writers. And I understand there's a discussion and a debate to be had there. Personally, I'm kind of on the side of, well, they can use whatever they want to create what they want. And if you think it isn't good enough because it would have been better with voice actors, that's fine. You don't buy it, that kind of thing. But anyway, while that's definitely a risk, it could also allow them to just create emergent gameplay and narrative that wasn't possible before. It's not possible to have voice actors react to things that you're actually saying. Like, you can't predict everything that a player could possibly say, whereas this Nvidia ACE stuff can just react to whatever you're saying. So it opens up possibilities in game design that aren't replacing voice actors as such, because it's doing things that you literally can't do with voice actors. Imagine a Mass Effect game where you didn't have dialogue choices, but you could actually just say what you wanted to say, and the NPCs would react to that. Like, the NPCs would obviously have their kind of parameters set so they can't give away things that would ruin the story, and they can't give you more information than they should be able to, but they can at least react to the way you're saying it, the tone of voice and stuff like that. Imagine a Call of Duty where you could always play as a full squad regardless of how many friends are online. You could always have that kind of team-based gameplay. Or Grand Theft Auto where the NPCs in the city actually remembered the crazy stuff that you'd been doing and talked about it afterwards. You know, you'd see newspaper headlines or TV shows in the background talking about some of the crazy stuff that you'd been doing. I think that kind of future is a lot closer than we realized, and I'm excited to see it. If you enjoyed this video, if you enjoy this type of video, don't forget to leave a like on it. Let me know in the comments what you think about Nvidia ACE. I think it's super exciting. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you for the next one. Goodbye.